Good morning and welcome to the first BI Take 30 for 2021. Thank you all for joining. So today's session is going to be on creating an executive dashboard and a design approach to doing so. So this is actually a bit of an extension of our last Take 30 in December 15th, I believe. So we're going to retouch on design thinking and experience design, but then begin to get deeper into the process and take you through an example. All right, so I'll let today's panelists introduce themselves. So Bob, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, good morning. Bob O'Donnell. I've been with Ironside for a little over 3 years now. Before that, I was with IBM/Cognos for about 18. And before that, I was actually a customer for a couple of years. So I've been in BI and analytics on a sales side and a consulting side for quite some time now.
And I'm John Fellner. I've been with Ironside for about 9 years and was with another consulting company before that. And then before that, was in the trenches running a BI team. So been doing this kind of stuff for a bit, and experience design is relatively new, but I've found that it's a nice way to kind of get in touch with some of the softer skills that blend into the technology skills that we've probably already grew up with. But it's a fun part of building, for example, a dashboard project, is to start with the design thinking process.
Great, thank you, John. All right, so I wanted to start off by talking about our upcoming session. So today we're focused on creating an executive dashboard. Next week we're going to focus on enterprise reporting migrations and how to go about it and what to think about. And then on the 25th, getting started with AI presented by our data science team. So again, this is a bit of a replay from December, but we see experience design as design thinking for analytics, and design thinking has been around, maybe for 20 years. That's defined as the cognitive, strategic, and practical processes by which design concepts are developed. So experience design goes a bit further and focuses in on analytics, right? So the practice of observing and then improving the ways people reach their analytics goals using design thinking. And really, experience design, or as we call it, EXD, straddles three different worlds, right? It lives at the intersection of business and its goals, users and their needs, and technology. And really what we're trying to do is maximize technology's potential to solve user problems and satisfy business goals. When we bring these three perspectives together, we maximize that potential of technology, solve those problems, and satisfy those goals. So how do we use experience design to prioritize perspectives? First, the user needs come first. Users are rarely involved in decisions and often have no voice, so we need to advocate for them. Business goals often align with user goals, but in order to thrive, a business often has an additional set of needs to fulfill. And then lastly, technology holds possibilities, but also constraints, right? In a perfect world, we pick the right tool for every job, but in reality, reality often constrains that choice. So for example, Cognos might be exactly the right feature set that we need, but Tableau is our enterprise analytics tool, right? So those are, there are constraints and compromises that we often need to make. All right, so with an overview of design thinking and experience design, I will turn it over to John.
Thanks, Scott. So yeah, just to point out, this is just an example of a project that we actually did. And then Bob's going to run through the prototype that we actually built. And so what you're going to see here is sort of the beginning of the process, and then Bob's going to show you the end of what came out of the end of it. So this process started with a bunch of initial design interviews. And I want to point out too that this project was done 100% remotely because it started during COVID. So the world that we're in now is we've sort of adapted. I think everyone has. But typically this would have been done on site in person. But we have to adapt, and we actually think that it can be quite successful doing this in a remote fashion as well. So we start out with design interviews where we bring in the actual users, and sometimes it's people who speak on their behalf, and sometimes it's the actual users, for a couple-hour session to really go through what all of their thoughts are on the business questions that they want to answer with the data. Sometimes we ask them to bring artifacts of reports that they've used in the past, or reports that they're looking to create a more visual experience from. And then we have a designer that actually goes through and builds what we call a wireframe, and we start out relatively simple, and we build on that, but we don't get to the end of the process before we show it. So we do demos throughout. We do a demo usually after week 1, sometimes after week 2. So if you think of, if you do agile sprints, oftentimes we'll do this in 2-week blocks. And so whatever we've got completed after the 2 weeks, we would demonstrate back to the initial interviewees. So everyone's brought into this collaborative process and brought back again to refine things. And then during the second 2 weeks, we refine what we had, and we come up with something a little bit more concrete. And then at that point, we actually sometimes we hand them a prototype to test drive. So what Bob's going to show you today will be something that you could let other people test drive and give feedback on. They could even annotate on the tool itself, which I think is pretty valuable. And then you come up with something that's more high fidelity and present your final design, your final demo. You do a design review to go through some of the specifics of how this thing's going to work, and then you get a sign off, and then you go ahead and build it. And then again, this is just an example sort of project plan for about 6 weeks. Can be less, can be more, depending on how complicated the design needs to be. But the whole point is it's collaborative, and you've not touched your BI environment during this process. You've done this all in a prototyping tool. Next slide, Scott. Okay, so just some considerations for all of those design sessions, especially if they are remote. Try to record those meetings, because I can guarantee you're going to go back and need to review them, take some notes. Sometimes things that people say during meetings are lost, but they might be some very important things that you need to come back to. And then try to use some collaboration tools. A lot of our online tools that we use today do have them, but some don't. Thinking of, for example, Slack. If you guys use Slack, you can highlight things on somebody's screen. You can ask people to take control and show you what they mean. Surveys are mentioned here because it's something that we might do either during the meeting, put up a poll or a survey, or before we even have the meeting, to try to get people to force some feedback, right? Suggest some feedback from people before we actually get into the process. Take and share notes, and again, all of that, especially if things are being recorded, you can all go back and review them down the line. We always ask people to do the demonstration themselves, and eventually to take control and test drive the application or the prototype, because it's one thing to look on the designer screen and see what people are doing, but if someone's actually driving, it gives them a better feel for usability. And then last but not least, that sort of restated again, is just encourage a participation. If we have 8 people on a call, but only 2 people are participating, it's not really going to give us the full picture of enough input to really develop a great product. So try to call on people by name and ask them to participate. Just like sort of like a lot of kids are going to Zoom classes these days, I'm sure the teacher calls on people so that they get people to participate. And that's it for me. On to Bob.
All right, so what I will do is I'll give Bob presenter.
Thank you. All right, so can everyone see my screen? I'll assume that's a yes since I heard nothing. So this is a sample of a prototype we've cleaned up, to protect the innocent. This was used, built in one of the tools that are available out there. There are quite a few of them that are available that let you do quick prototyping for dashboards, applications, reporting content. They kind of fit across a number of different objects styles. So in this case, it's obviously an executive dashboard. And in this case, we actually were kind of gearing this towards a specific tool because we knew that ahead of time. That's not necessarily always the case, and that's why a tool like this can be very beneficial as far as crafting what the look and feel and the interaction of the object is going to be like without actually having to worry about the specifics of it. Now, that'll come in later, and we'll talk about that after a little bit of the demo, but that's something to consider as well. I have no perspective on how easy or hard these tools are to use. That really wasn't my focus for this. We generally have professional UX designers that come in and work with us, whether it's with the organization that we're working with or one of our folks, and we kind of craft this. And you can see as you look at something like this, the definition is, as John mentioned, it's a wireframe to start. So, across the top, you're like, okay, we're going to decide that the navigation and the prompting is going to be across the top. The next row or layer of this is going to be a bunch of metrics, and then we're going to get into some more of the specifics. And in this case, they also did horizontal or vertical slicing as well. So we took the left-hand side is going to be totals overall. The middle was going to be the gas because this was based for a utility company, and then the far right-hand side was the electric. So one of the things I like about this, so this is a full-blown view of this. There are links on here. So if I actually click on something that doesn't show up, it actually highlights other objects where I can connect to it. So I've got the navigation up here. I can change the total view from that to something different. I can change the percentage to totals as well. So I can let the end user see an idea of not only what it's going to look like, but have some feel for what the navigation and interaction would be with this as well. So there's actually hover over here as well. So they've added that to it. So not only are you getting a look and feel for it, but you're getting the interaction as well. Now, one of the things you have to be careful of, and I've actually had an example of this, is this is just a prototyping tool. It's not connected to any database in the background. It's not a tool. So everything is very, very quick. And we've actually had a customer, and when we got through the prototyping phase and started to build the content out, she mentioned that it was much slower than the prototype. And well, we're like, we kind of need to set expectations with that because this has no data. It's not connecting to anyone's infrastructure in the background. It's really just mocked up data. So of course it's going to be very, very quick. So to set expectations for that is very important, that this is literally, there's nothing behind this. Your results may vary as we move down the path for this. Now in this example too, so we had the gas page. If I can click on that, I have things I can click on here as well. So if I want to see different changes with those, so there's some depth to all of this as well, which I think is a nice plus for the end users. And again, as John mentioned, because a lot of these are web-based and available, you can provide the links to the people that are working with you to come up with the design and structure and layout for these dashboards. So as you're, and to the timeline, we're going to demo this back to the user group. They can go out on their own and take a look at it. And hopefully over time, you're getting to touch as many people as possible, whether it's through the meetings that John mentioned or for them to go out and actually play with it themselves to get feedback. Because the more people you get involved in these processes as early as possible, there's less rework at the end and less changes, hopefully. So that's the idea behind that. So there's another electric page here as well that you've got a number of different visualizations as well. And in this example, they actually asked for a details page. So this actually shows you, and it was in this case downloadable, that where you could go in and pull the information back from the resources that were going to be used in the background. Now, again, this is all mocked up for this. And of course up here, so print capabilities, a number of other prompts that you can lay out. Now, none of these are actually working, but it gives the end users the idea of, okay, so this is where the navigation components are going to be. This is where the filters components are going to be. Imagine, if you will, the magic words of, you know, behind this drop down, these values are here. You can filter and navigate and move around through all of this stuff. So that is the demo. If we can go back to the slides, please. Do I need to give someone presenter, or?
I'll take it back. One second.
All right. And again, that's just one available tool out there. There are quite a few of them. If you have someone in your organization who does UX design, they're probably very familiar with what's out there. Again, I don't have a preference for any of them. I'm not the guy that was using them. I just used the end result to help build the prototype, or I'm sorry, the end result. So one of the interesting things, like I kind of mentioned it, we had an idea that this was going to be built in a specific tool. You don't always know that, and your UX designer may not know the BI tools or whatever application tools that you're going to be using to build out the content. So there's going to be some considerations as far as what was built and what the end result might look like. Now, you hope that if you have a pretty good sense for the tool that you're going to be using, the fidelity is closer. You're going to build that out, and if you then decide what the tool is going to be, it might be a little more difficult, and there's going to be some things that you're going to need to change moving forward. That, to Scott's point before, it is across a number of worlds here. So although the UX designer may not know the tool, and the tool that they use to build the prototype may have a certain look and feel for prompt objects and things like that, there's no guarantee that that's all going to work out. And to the point of this top of the slide, after the prototype is done, the design iteration will continue to go on, because as you start to move things from a prototype to an actual tool set, you're going to see some potential differences. So the first one we talk about here is dashboard tool selection and the build. So making sure that we can match visualizations and charts from what the prototype was to what's available in the BI tool. Even when you know what the tool is, there could be some differences between all of those. So something to be aware of. And key is, and kind of John touched on the touch points, is to making sure that we're staying in touch with the key stakeholders and the people responsible for deciding what this is going to look like. Make sure that you keep them on board. We're doing regular demos of the tool as well. So if we built a page or a section of a page, we would demo that back to that group, similar to the way we were demoing the prototype. So keeping them in the loop, making sure that we get sign off on all of the changes that we may need to make as we move forward. So some of the other things, even if you've got the right chart or visualization, there are certain things that might be different. So the ability to place a legend, what might go in it, how the axes look in some charts, whether there's a way to sparsely show axis values or they're heavily loaded. Depending on what the prototype had, it might be completely looking different, look and feel differently. Prompt objects, drop downs, filters, things like that, they will probably look differently and they may interact differently. Ultimately, you'd love to be able to have everything click, someone clicks on something and it changes the screen, kind of that auto submit feel with an application. But then you look back at that and say, okay, well, there's certain things in here that they might be multi-selecting, so you can't really use that. If there's a calendar object where you need to select multiple things, year, month, day, so you might need to put a go button or a finish button on the page somewhere that might change the way it looks. And then we showed the tooltips too. What can be shown and how. They may vary from tool to tool. Some of the tools out there right now give you a lot of control over what can be shown, and some are just really showing you the data values that are available. So another thing to keep in mind is the user interface and the delivery. So and things we've gone through in the past. So does the organization have a standard desktop? If so, what's the resolution? Are there going to be people using this across on a tablet? Is there an expectation to make this mobile? And things, you may see answers to these questions change as you move through the life cycle of the initial design to the final build. Resolution is one of the big ones, and getting people on board as far as, okay, what about scrolling? Is a horizontal scroll on a dashboard acceptable or not? Is a vertical scroll? Both, neither. And then making sure that you're building that final result to those resolution requirements. Again, the prototype, things are probably a little bit easier to put into spaces, and they're not really interacting with each other, so it makes it a little bit easier to do that. Maybe a little bit more difficult when you get to the actual tool set. Do they have standard browsers? So is an organization wide open and you can actually have multiple browsers? So I'm now building this for Chrome and Firefox and Edge or IE or whatever the options might be. Or do they have a single browser and we don't have to focus on all of those? And simple things like, for KPIs and such, if I have images, up and down arrows, plus and minus signs for tracking and trending and things on some of the KPIs. Where did those come from originally? Are they usable? And can we get those into the organization's environment, or are they locked down? So if that is the case and we can't get access to those, we have to come up with a different scenario on how we're going to want to display that information. Not the end of the world, but it might just change the look and feel for it a little bit. So also data considerations, the high and low value extremes, data sparsity, and the ability to drill up and down on a navigation path. So, of course, the prototype looks fantastic. Everything looks beautiful because the data is all made up. When you get into a real world scenario, you may have data that does not look good in that visualization. We actually had a situation where we were doing like a sparkline chart in a list, and unfortunately one of the certain sets of filters that they were using pretty regularly for one of the organizations, or I think it was a business line, had a very, very high or low number that threw off the skew on all the rest of them. And they really wanted to see those in comparison so that the legend and axis for each one of those would be the same. Well, when we actually run it with their data, that number is so high that that's the only chart you see. Everything else just shows up as a zero, basically. So we had to kind of go back and rework that and find a solution around that. And that's no one's fault. It's just a matter of the data that was laid out that way. So similar with trend lines. As you drill down or filter on information, a trend line may not look as elegant as it did in the prototype. So is there something else you want to see? How do you work around those? And again, constant communication with the organization, the stakeholders, to make sure that comes out. And again, the same thing. If you're drilling down from a high level to a lower level as you get into less data, or potentially a much broader set of data, if one thing drills down to 300, that chart that you were looking at before may be completely different than it was. So, and finally, this is one of those things that kind of should be thought about throughout the process, but as you get to the end and people actually start using it, it becomes more of a focus. Information overload and consistency. So is everyone getting the same amount of consumable and understandable information? The old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if I look at a picture and the 1,000 words I use to describe it is completely different than the 1,000 words someone else is using, then we've missed the mark. We want to make sure that when people look at visualizations, charts, they're getting the same thought process behind that. They may look at it a little bit differently, but the idea is that the numbers and the information that they're pulling from that is the same. And it was funny, we had one not too long ago where we went through this process, and towards the very end, some new folks came on, and one of the late stakeholders actually came in and looked at the visualization and said, I literally have no idea what that's telling me. And so they went back and they had a conversation amongst each other and started to get a feel for it. If we don't know what it is, maybe it's just a nice shiny thing and we need to figure out a business value visualization to put in that place. And that's what we did. So the prototype is a great and a really, really helpful tool to quicken the process and get everyone on board. But when the prototype is done, you're not done with the iteration. And in order to be successful, I think you need to be flexible all the way through the process. And Scott, that's it for me.
All right, thank you very much, Bob. So let us open it up for Q&A, and let's give a second to check on the questions here. First question, why use a separate prototyping tool? Why not just prototype in the BI tool itself? And why use sample data? Why not use real data?
Yeah, I can take that. It's a big temptation, right, for developers who love using their Tableaus and their Power BI and whatever to just jump right in and try to build something. But the danger there is it takes too long, and it takes too long to rework things. So the temptation, I understand it because I love using those tools as well. But when you use these lower footprint tools that aren't connected to your data sources, there's a lot less technology to manage. There is a time when you transition over to that tool, as sort of Bob alluded to, and that when you get into the actual build, you can still iterate. But that initial design to get it kind of pixel perfect and interacting the way that people agree to, your time to market's going to be much quicker if you use a prototyping tool.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, John. Okay. Question about iterations. So what, when you're going through and doing design iterations, how do you, what's the right number? How do you determine what the right number of iterations is?
I would go with at least 2 and not more than 4. And the reason you need at least 2 is to get at least through the fidelity of the wireframe. And those are 2-week sprints typically. So a 4-week process is about the minimum. You could try to speed that up, but you'd have to have demos in between, and you have to have people working a little bit overtime and really paying attention. But I wouldn't go more than 4, because if you go more than 4, then you're taking too long to try to get something to market. So that's kind of the sweet spot. Is 3 is what we typically like to use at this point. And then again, you get into the build and you can do a little bit of that, but knowing that the more you try to change, the further you get into the build, the harder it is to make meaningful changes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we are at the end of our allotted time. So I want to thank you all for joining, and thanks very much to John and Bob for taking us through. And we look forward to having you join us next week when we're going to talk about enterprise BI migrations. Thank you very much, and have a great day.